Live from the International McNeil Film Studios in beautiful Baja Teston, here's Professor Mark McNeil talking about investments.
Well, thank you. All right, we are talking about investment spending. You'll recall it. The four components of aggregate demand are consumption, investment, government, net export. So we're talking about the investment one, and what you have to remember is that investment is risky because you always have to make decisions now about the future costs and benefits of an action, and nobody knows the future. We have not perfected the Ouija board or the magic 8-ball or something, so it's always risky. Second, it's a major factor in productivity, living standards, and economic growth. If you ever find a country where the people live well, they have invested a lot. The investment we're talking about is gross private domestic investment. So gross, not net. Private, not public. It's not the government. It's private entities making investments. And domestic, within the borders of the United States. And investment, like my in-laws, is volatile.
I heard that.
Oh, she shouldn't sit by the door and listen like that. I may pay for that one. Investment in the short run affects aggregate demand because it's spending. So when firms go and buy new factories or machinery or whatever, it affects aggregate demand. It shifts aggregate demand. But in the long run, when the investment is in place and it's starting to be used to produce things, it affects aggregate supply. So the short run aggregate demand is affected by investment spending or increases in investment spending. But in the long run, it affects aggregate supply. It causes economic growth. So savings is the act of not consuming from disposable income. So you get paid $1,000 after taxes and so forth, after taxes. And so you take, and out of that $1,000, you spend $800. That's consumption spending. But the other $200 is savings, and it's counted as savings, even if it is just put in your mattress or buried in a mayonnaise jar in your backyard. It's still savings. Now, once that saving is used to buy something, an investment, a bond, it could be equipment, it could be whatever. Once that is, the act of investing is taking the savings and buying gross private domestic types of things. Investment involves the present versus future trade-off. Every individual, every society, every family has this choice that out of the $1,000 of income, disposable income, they could go to Las Vegas and spend it all and enjoy themselves, but there's nothing left over that will help them in the future. Alternatively, they could take $500, live like a dog, save the other $500, get some investment that pays them 10% per year, and for the rest of their lives, maybe, depending on the investment that they make, they'll be $50 better off every single year. So, investment, you sacrifice now to make yourself more productive in the future. But there is that trade-off between living well now and living well in the future. That's an important distinction. And again, any country that has lives well, maybe not the United States, there are special circumstances there, but generally speaking, countries that live well have sacrificed now so that they can build the factories and the highways, dams, bridges, airports, etc. Now we get to talk about investment demand. This is a demand curve, and it's downward sloping. And it is the relationship between the interest rate. Because businesses are assumed to borrow money to make their investments with. So the cost of borrowing the money, here we're talking about interest rates as a cost to a business of borrowing the money to make an investment. And the quantity of dollars for investment purposes. The quantity of dollars for investment purposes. It's not the quantity of dollars that people want to hold, not the quantity of dollars in the foreign exchange, none of that stuff. It's specific. The quantity of dollars demanded to make investments with. So here is the interest rate badly drawn. And here is the quantity of dollars for investment, and we call this the investment demand curve. So what causes a movement, that is a change in the quantity demanded of investment dollars? And the answer is a change in interest rates from I1 to I2 will cause the quantity of dollars demanded for investment purposes to go from Q1 to Q2. That's a change in the quantity demanded caused by a change in the value of the independent variable. What then would cause a change in investment demand, which is a shift, either an increased shift right or decreased shift left? And the answer is any of the other factors that affect businesses' decisions about how much to invest besides the interest rate. So what are these other things that play into this and are held constant when we draw this investment demand curve up? Expectations about the future profitability. In the middle of the COVID recession, expectations of profitability are not good. And I would guess businesses, for the most part, are simply not investing very much. So that investment demand curve would have shifted left because of this. Public policies, taxes, credits, etc. The government's doing a lot of that stuff for fiscal policy and giving extra bonuses for investment with either investment tax credits or depreciation schemes, or sheltering it from taxes, sheltering the gains from the investment from taxes. So public policy affects this as well and causes shifts when it changes. Technological change, a lot of production processes, when the technology changes, the producers of that thing have to adopt the new technology, and they have to buy the equipment to do it with in order to keep up and stay competitive. The level of economic activity in boom times, everybody's producing. And see, this is net investment. It's gross investment. But during the periods like this of boom times, firms are buying a lot of equipment and expanding their operations and so forth. So the healthier the economy, that would cause a shift right in aggregate supply. When the economy is unhealthy, it would cause a shift left. And the size of the capital stock plays into that as well. So let's look at how we determine what is the investment demand curve based on. And the answer is we start with a series of investment choices. This is my cheat sheet there. A series of investment choices that, this firm could invest in project A, which will cost $75 million, and it will return, they calculate, $15 million per year. Now that provides an expected rate of return. That's the interest, the percentage rate of return is 20%. So you divide 15 by 75 and multiply by 100 to get the percent. Second option would be to invest in project B, which will cost $240 and will yield 30. I believe this is 12.5% expected rate of return, ERR, expected rate of return. Of the third project, it'll cost us from $110 million. It will return $7 million per year. This is 6.36%. D, 280 returns 40 per year. That is 14.3%. 10 cost returns 5. That's a 50%. Whew. 50%. There aren't many like that. And cost 65 for project F and returns $3 million per year. That's 4.5%. Expected rate of return, ERR. So, what does this have to do? Well, what this tells you is that depending on the interest rate, some of these investment options are in the money. They will be profitable. And the higher the interest rate that firms have to pay, the more profitable the investment has to be for it to actually be profitable. It has to have an expected rate of return greater than the interest rate that the firms have to pay. So if the firm has to pay 22%, well, it's not going to borrow money at 20 when the interest rate is 20. It will not accept a rate of return, when they have to pay 22% interest, it won't be profitable. Same if it's going to return 12 and they have to pay 22, they're not going to do that investment either. Not that one, but that one's in the money. So they would want to borrow $10 million. $10 million for investment purposes. And so if the interest rate is 22%, the amount of dollars demanded for investment purposes is going to be 10 million. Now, what if the interest rate falls to 13%? Well, all of a sudden, this original one is in the money here. They would want to borrow for that. But so is this one, because it pays 14 and the interest is only 13 now. This is not in the money because it's only 12. They have to pay 13. This one's in the money. Expected rate of return is 20 and they only have to pay 13. So what's in the money now is this one, the 10 million, this one 280, so for a total of 290, and this one 75. So they would want to borrow money for these three investments. So what is 75? I've already figured it out. It's 365. 365. This firm would like to borrow $365 million at an interest rate of 13% and spend them to finance these three investments. So at 13%, the amount of money demanded is going to be $365. So that's another point on our investment demand curve. And what if the interest rate is 7%? Well, at 7%, that's not in the money. That's not. But this one is at 7%. So that is this amount plus the additional 240, which is it's 605. So 605 when the interest rate is 7%. And if we were to do this, for all the investments available to all the different companies, then we would have a series of points that would be so dense it would appear to be a straight line. And this would be the investment demand curve for this economy or this situation. And so what would cause the investment quantity demanded to change from 365 to 605? This is 605. And the answer is a change in interest rate from 13 to 7. If any of those other things we talked about on the back page changes, then that might cause a shift in investment demand one way or the other. But in any case, you see where this investment demand curve comes from. This idea of various investment options have different returns and then different expected rate of returns. And depending on the interest rate, you get the actual dollar amount that will be demanded. So we're good so far. Now we just have to take this investment demand and tie it to the real GDP and the price level. So let's say that this is the aggregate demand and this is the equilibrium price level, and that's the equilibrium quantity of real GDP. The Federal Reserve can lower the interest rate. So what if the Federal Reserve does something to lower the interest rate from 13 to 7%? Well, if that happens, then the amount of investment will increase from whatever it was, 365 to 605, which means that aggregate demand is composed of consumption, investment, government, and net exports. When this term investment spending increases, it causes aggregate demand to shift to the right, and we get a new equilibrium price level, which would put upward pressure on prices, and it would tend to cause real GDP to increase a bit. So this is in the short run, when the investment spending increases. But what happens after this investment, these factories and machines and processes and so forth are in the factories and producing? That's in the longer term, and in the longer term it will cause long-run aggregate supply to increase when this investment spending increases. So in the short run, investment spending affects aggregate demand. In the longer run, it affects the real variables, long-run aggregate supply. Well, that just about covers the ground, I believe. And I got all dressed up. This is the official McNeil tartan tie. Since it's a investment topic, I thought I'd look appropriate for bankers and so forth. Hasta la vista.